The entire room fell into silence the very instant the little girl stepped inside, barefoot, her small body covered in bruises, no more than 6 years old, her tangled hair matted against her cheeks, her thin dress soaked through with icy rainwater and stained with something darker. She did not knock, did not cry. Tony, the head of security, had opened the door with a pale face, stepping aside to let the small figure pass as if he had seen a ghost. She simply walked forward through a room filled with men who had once drowned traitors in concrete, who had struck without blinking, who had buried their pasts inside the darkest basements of Chicago. And yet now they stood frozen by the sight of her. Not one voice rose, not one man dared to move. Her eyes locked straight onto the man seated at the head of the table where the ultimate power of the underground empire was decided. Her small body trembling as she slowly raised her arm, a small crumpled piece of paper stuck to her skin, nearly slipping free from the damp tape that held it in place. Nathan Callahan, the leader of the organization, the man who had survived 3 assassination attempts, the man who never allowed emotion to guide his decisions, silently rose to his feet. He stepped closer and lowered his gaze to the shaky, uneven letters written in a child's trembling hand. "She said you would protect me." On the back of that crumpled paper was a crude map, pressed into her hand just hours ago by a servant who, unable to bear the cruelty any longer, had secretly unlocked the cellar door and whispered the location of the only man who could save her. Only 5 words, yet they shattered the cold world Nathan had spent 15 years building. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment Nathan understood that family is not those who share your blood but those for whom you are willing to shed your own. In the suspended breath of the room, still held by Lily's sudden appearance, if you are listening to this story right now, take a quiet moment to subscribe to our channel and like and share this video, so these unfinished stories may continue to be told each day. Wherever you are listening from, whether in the heart of a crowded city or in the quiet corner of a solitary room, leave a comment to tell us where you are following this story, so we may know in which part of this wide world the story has reached your heart. Nathan stood motionless before the little girl, his eyes never leaving her small face for even a single second. In the dim light of the underground meeting room beneath Chicago, every fragile line of the child's features stirred an image he believed had been buried forever. Those eyes deep and sorrowful enough to chill the soul, those trembling lips pressed tight as if holding back years of silent pain, the faint curve of her brows so hauntingly familiar. Nathan's heart tightened, because there was no mistaking it. This child bore the face of James Carter, his closest friend, and the only man who had once saved his life during a crossfire between rival families 4 years ago. James had died in a car explosion staged as an accident, and since that day, Nathan had never dared to touch that memory. Yet now James's face stood vividly before him in the fragile form of a trembling, wounded, and utterly alone little girl. Nathan slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping across the loyal men in the room. No one spoke and no one moved, as though the entire organization was holding its breath for something greater than any war. Tony, the head of security, shifted slightly as if to step forward, but Nathan raised a hand to stop him. He walked to the chair on the right of the long table, the chair that was always left empty, and that no one was ever permitted to sit in. The chair meant for family, a symbol of blood loyalty, remembrance, and sacred bonds that Nathan rarely revealed. He placed his hand on the back of the chair, looked at the little girl, and spoke gently in a low voice no one had ever heard from him before asking her name. She lifted her head, her wide, cautious eyes watching him, while her voice was so small it could barely be heard as she said, Lily Carter." Nathan closed his eyes for a brief second, as though a verdict had fallen straight into his heart. Carter, there was no longer any doubt she was James's daughter. He gave a slight nod and pulled the empty chair back without signaling or explaining. Lily seemed to understand, or perhaps simply sensed safety in the silence, and timidly approached, climbing onto the chair. Her tiny feet could not reach the floor, swaying in the air, as though her small body did not belong to the cruel world surrounding her. The bruises on her legs, the cracked skin on her lip, and the quiet resignation in the eyes of a child forced to learn survival far too soon, made the air in the room grow heavy. Nathan sat beside her, his hands folded before him, his gaze no longer cold but filled with something unnamed, close to pain, close to regret, close to an unspoken vow. Tony looked at him, unable to hide his confusion as he began to speak, but Nathan interrupted without looking at him, declaring that no one was to touch the child, not a single person, and from this moment on she belonged to him. To the men long accustomed to death and betrayal, those words sounded like a sentence upon anyone who dared challenge that command. Lily sat silently, her eyes still scanning the room, yet when she looked at Nathan, her gaze lingered slightly longer, as though within the harsh lines of his face she recognized something of her father still alive, and for the first time since entering she tilted her head and gently leaned against his arm. No one spoke, and in that moment, The empty chair was no longer a place for the dead, but became the symbol of a life being reborn in the deepest shadows of sin and blood. The icy wind cut across the skin, like blades carrying drifting snow along the sidewalk. As Emily Carter stepped off the last bus on the southern edge of Chicago, it had been 4 years since she returned. 4 years spent trying to forget every memory tied to the city that had given both heaven and hell. But trauma never vanished. It only slept beneath the skin, waiting for the right moment to rise. And that moment came 3 days earlier with an anonymous call and a single sentence carried through the hiss of wind in the receiver telling her that if she still wanted to find her sister, she should return to Chicago. Emily had not slept since. Lily, the niece she once cradled when their mother died, the child she once sang to sleep every night, had vanished from the foster system after the explosion that killed James, her half-brother and Lily's final legal guardian. At that time, Emily was only a 21-year-old student with no allies, no lawyers, no family support, and no trust from any authority. They told her Lily had been transferred to a temporary foster home in another state. They said the records were sealed for security. They said many things, but no one ever answered the one question that mattered: why she had no right to know whether her sister was alive or dead. Emily tightened her worn scarf and scanned the fogged windows of the old neighborhood. Everything looked unchanged. Yet something inside her stirred uneasily, as if the city were hiding a secret beneath its streets. She drew a deep breath and rolled her suitcase down the narrow alley leading to Aunt Pam's boarding house, the only blood relative she once trusted until the day she sold James's life for hush money from a woman named Veronica. Emily never forgot that name. Veronica Callahan, with her cold gray eyes, her emotionless smile, and a voice so light it made every human life sound like a chess piece. Emily had no proof, but her instinct never failed her. And if anyone stood behind Lily's disappearance, it could only be that woman. She stopped at the rusted iron gate and looked up to the second-floor apartment, where light still slipped through the thin curtains. She knocked 3 times with no answer, then a 4th time until the door cracked open, the sound of a chain sliding aside before Aunt Pam's aged face appeared, her eyes flashing with shock, then unease as she spoke. Emily answered, "Yes, it is me, I need to talk." A short time later, they sat facing each other in the cramped living room, and Emily did not circle the truth, asking directly who her aunt had sold Lily's information to. Aunt Pam looked away silent and said there was nothing to tell, that the child had been transferred and Emily should stop digging. Emily pulled an old photograph from her coat, a picture of her James and Lily, 3 smiling faces in a sunlit park, and slid it across the table, her voice breaking as she said, 4 years and the child was still missing, and begged her aunt to speak if she knew anything. Aunt Pam's hands trembled as she poured more tea, unable to steady them, and finally whispered that a wealthy-looking woman had come the year before, asking about James and Lily, leaving behind a cash envelope and ordering her to stay silent, promising that the child would be cared for better than by anyone else. Emily felt the cold spread through her body, not from the wind outside but from the confirmation of her deepest fear. Veronica had found Lily, and that meant her sister had never left Chicago. Emily stood abruptly, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears, and knew she could not turn away again. This time, even if she had to face hell itself, she would bring Lily home, unaware that in another corner of the city, her sister was sitting in the chair once reserved only for those who carried the blood of Callahan. Deep beneath the basement of one of the oldest buildings on the western side of Chicago, where yellow lights flickered endlessly and the air carried the scent of rusted iron, Nathan Callahan sat in silence before a dark wooden table. In front of him lay an aged file Tony had brought in from the archive 3 hours earlier. Nathan rarely revisited the past because in his world every memory carried a price, and too often that price was paid in blood. But tonight was different. There was something in Lily's eyes that he could not ignore. Not only the terrifying resemblance to James Carter, but the way she sat so quietly among strangers without crying, without trembling, as if she had already learned to accept pain as a natural part of life. Nathan turned each page, every sheet pulling up fragments he had tried to bury deep. When he reached near the end, a photograph slipped from the folder. He bent to pick it up, intending to slide it back, but his hand froze midair. In the faded image were 3 people: a young, brown-haired man with a radiant smile, his arm around a woman with sharp eyes and long hair neatly tied back. Between them stood a little girl about 2 years old with a round face and wide, curious eyes. It was James Carter, Emily Carter, and little Lily. Nathan felt as if he had been struck hard in the chest. He remembered this photo. James used to carry it in his wallet, once holding it up before Nathan on a freezing winter night as they sat atop an abandoned building sharing their last cigar while waiting for a dangerous deal. James had said, "If I do not come back, find Emily and the child, do not let them vanish from this world." At the time, Nathan had laughed and told him not to speak of bad omens. And a few months later, James died in an explosion that Nathan still believed was partly his own fault. Now that old promise returned like an icy wind slipping through concrete walls. The photograph trembled in Nathan's hand in a way that had never happened since the day he accepted the seat his father left behind. He studied Lily's face in the image, then compared it to the child now. There was no doubt left. Those eyes that gazed confirmed what he could no longer deny. The little girl sitting in his meeting room was James's daughter, the last living trace of the man who once threw himself in front of bullets for him. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his eyes closing, his hand gripping the table edge until his knuckles turned white. Tony stood by the door, silent, as though knowing that the greatest storms never begin with thunder but with moments of stillness like this. At last Nathan spoke, his voice calm yet carrying across the room. "Find me the file of Emily Carter, every address, every relocation, every place she has lived over the past 6 years. And Tony, please leave out nothing." Tony nodded and left without a question. He knew the last time Nathan had said the word please was at James's funeral. When the door closed, Nathan looked at the photograph once more, then placed it on the table beside the handgun that had served 3 generations of the Callahan family. He spoke no words, yet his eyes held every vow. If the world owed James Carter anything, then he himself would be the one to repay it, even if it meant walking through blood, through betrayal, or through bonds, thought unbreakable. Because this time, it was not for honor, nor for power, but for a little girl whose eyes were identical to the man who once called him brother. That night, the rain fell as though the sky itself were collapsing. In the blinding curtain of water, Nathan stood before the sealed-off zone yellow tape, snapping in the wind like a belated warning. The stench of smoke, of burning fuel, of scorched flesh mixed together and drove straight into his lungs, making him choke. The scene remained burned into his memory as vividly as if it had happened only yesterday. The car had been blown apart in the parking lot of warehouse number 7, where James had arranged to meet him to discuss an important deal with an intermediary from Mexico. But Nathan never made it. He had been detained by an unfamiliar call that lasted exactly 12 minutes, and precisely 12 minutes later, James exploded along with the car. No one survived, and nothing remained identifiable, except the blackened wristwatch James always wore on his left hand. Nathan had never forgiven himself for arriving too late. Later, after confirming information through his internal network, he discovered that the location of the meeting had been leaked by a close insider. Yet what he never expected was that very night Emily had come to headquarters drenched, furious and shattered. "My brother died because of you." She stood before Nathan, neither screaming nor crying, speaking only that single sentence like a cold blade piercing his chest. If you had not dragged him into this filthy world, he would not have died like a dog on the street. She left without giving Nathan a chance to explain, and perhaps at that moment he himself believed the same. James had been a good man who believed in loyalty and fairness, but he did not belong to the darkness. Nathan was the one who pulled him in, asking him to act as a bridge to peripheral groups because James had a face people trusted, and James always did everything believing Nathan would protect him, just as they once protected each other as children roaming the southern riverbanks of the city. For 4 years, Nathan never once spoke of James. But tonight, as he looked at the old photograph and saw Lily sitting in the chair that once belonged to James during internal meetings, everything surged back like an underground tide ready to break the surface. He wondered if had he not allowed James to join that deal, had he not been delayed by that suspicious call, whether James would still be alive, whether Emily would still call him family, whether Lily would still have a true home. Guilt tortured him in a way no bullet ever could. It did not kill quickly but gnawed away silently, leaving scars in its wake. He stood and walked to the glass cabinet in the corner where he kept his most personal keepsakes, not for their material worth but for what could not be touched. He opened a drawer and pulled out an aged envelope containing James's handwritten letter sent before his final deal. Within it, a line read, "If anything happens, find my sister, and if the child is still alive, protect her as I once protected you." Nathan sat back in his chair, his gaze resting on Lily, sleeping peacefully in the adjacent room under medical care after a full examination. The bruises, the scratches, and the way her eyes flinched whenever someone moved too quickly near her struck his heart like blades. He swore he would find whoever had dared lay hands on that child, not only for James but because he owed himself redemption. And if anyone believed Nathan Callahan had grown soft, they would have to learn fear all over again, because this time the one who would fall would not be the innocent. Emily sat curled into the icy leather chair in the corner of the Chicago Department of Social Services waiting area, her hands gripping the worn cloth bag as though clinging to the last threads of patience she had left. She had waited nearly 2 hours just for the smallest chance to speak with the caseworker who had once overseen her sister's foster records 4 years earlier. Inside Emily's mind, the questions looped endlessly like a broken tape. Why Lily vanished from the system, who signed the guardianship transfer, And most of all, why every trace ended precisely on the day James died. The staff door opened, and a woman in her 40s with dark brown hair tightly pinned stepped out carrying a stack of files. Her name was Marcia Klein, who had once been responsible for Emily's district and was the last person to update Lily's records. Emily stood immediately, struggling to keep her voice steady as she introduced herself and demanded to see the original file. Marcia hesitated, then allowed her inside unease written plainly across her face. Once the door closed, Emily spoke without pretense, stating she knew Lily had not been transferred out of state, that someone had altered the system, and she needed to know whether Marcia was involved. After a moment of silence, Marcia opened the file, her hands beginning to tremble as she revealed the internal archive showed Lily was allegedly transferred to a family named Hartman in Indiana, yet the address did not exist in any federal database. Emily leaned forward, her voice tightening as she confirmed that the address was fictitious. Marcia nodded further, explaining the signature, authorizing the transfer was not hers, and the employee identification number was incorrect, and that she had been on 3 days leave at the exact time the record was altered. Something inside Emily seemed to shatter, as she realized every reassurance and every document she had struggled to obtain through legal channels for 4 years was built on a carefully constructed lie. Swallowing her rising anger, she demanded to see the guardianship inspection records and verification of living conditions. Marcia flipped rapidly through the pages before stopping to reveal 2 attached files, one being a black and white photocopy lacking an official stamp, and the other originating from a private law firm outside jurisdiction with the confidential requester listed as Veronica Callahan. The room seemed to freeze as Emily whispered that name as confirmation of the voice her instincts had cried out for years. Marcia lowered her voice, explaining that the documents bore the seal of the R. Donahue Law Office, and that the entire process was illegal. Emily needed to hear nothing more as she stood, thanked her mechanically and left without a tear or tremor, all emotion pressed down into the depths of raw fury. In the parking lot, the cold wind struck her face. Yet she felt only the fire of resolve as she realized they had all lied and that she would never be deceived again. She dialed a number she never thought she would call, and when the line connected, she spoke a single sentence that she knew what Veronica had done, and asked Nathan for help before anything worse could happen. Meanwhile, in Nathan's security surveillance room, sealed behind 3 steel doors and lead-lined walls, where no signal could penetrate, the darkest secrets of the city were tracked and stored on the screens. Before him were hacked traffic, camera images from 3 days earlier showing a black, unmarked SUV idling at the intersection of 37th Street near the abandoned Western Industrial Yards, where no one went unless they wished to remain unseen. The door opened, and a tall woman stepped out, cloaked from neck to heel with a wide-brimmed hat obscuring her face. Yet one profile was enough for Nathan to recognize Veronica Callahan, his half-sister, the celebrated financial icon of Chicago, who publicly ran a major investment fund and was praised by national financial media, but whom Nathan knew better than anyone, having grown up with her, watching even as a young girl how she used sweet smiles to persuade their wealthy father to divert funds from humanitarian projects into underground casinos. She was always indulged, praised, called a prodigy, while Nathan, the illegitimate son, was pushed into filth to earn his place. Yet until now, he never believed she could descend this far. Switching screens to confidential intelligence gathered over 6 months, he traced how the R. Donahue Law Office led back repeatedly to Veronica, who under legal cover maintained multiple offshore accounts laundering money through shell companies to dismantle Nathan's rivals without ever touching a weapon or shedding visible blood. And now she had manipulated the social services system itself to take Lily not out of family but out of control. She knew exactly who Lily was. James's daughter, the child who could draw Emily back and Emily in Veronica's eyes, was the greatest threat if left alive and free. Nathan stared at the screen as Veronica's emotionless gray eyes turned almost knowingly toward the camera, and in that gaze he remembered the nights of childhood illness, when she alone remained beside his bed, not with love but with the cold patience of a predator measuring survival. He rose, issuing orders for Tony to summon the entire data analysis team to reconstruct every transaction linked to Veronica over the past 3 years, and with certainty now knew she was no longer his sister but the most dangerous enemy he had ever faced, because she understood his mind, his instincts, his every reaction. Once the person he trusted most, she had become the perfect betrayer. But Nathan was no longer the 16-year-old boy excluded from family councils. He was the one who stood at the summit now, and this time there would be no mercy for James, for Emily, for Lily, and for himself, because this time the darkness bore the face of someone who once called him brother, and he would would drag her into the light at any cost. Nathan sat in the worn leather chair of his private room, a place reserved only for special guests or for the rare moments when he needed absolute silence to think. Lily sat opposite him, her small legs drawn up on the seat, her arms wrapped around her knees in a posture of instinctive self-protection carved deep into her subconscious. The doctors had examined her, bathed her, and dressed her in clean clothes, yet the exhaustion and the prematurely aged look in her eyes remained untouched. Nathan did not rush her because he knew that if he wanted Lily to speak, everything had to be slow and gentle, as though he were lifting a shattered heart. She played with a loose thread on her sleeve, her head lowered, and then suddenly spoke in a voice so small it was almost inaudible, asking if he knew what a room without windows was like. Nathan tightened his fingers slightly, forcing his breathing to remain steady, and told her to tell him. Lily nodded and said that it was very dark, that at first she cried, but the woman did not like the sound because it made her head hurt, so every time Lily cried, the door was locked for even longer. Nathan did not need to ask who the woman was because the name Veronica cut through his mind like a blade. Lily continued hesitantly but clearly, saying that she was not allowed to watch television and could not go outside unless accompanied, and that every morning she had to stand still in front of the mirror and repeat certain sentences the prestigation woman taught her. Nathan tilted his head and asked which sentences, and Lily looked at him, her eyes wide, then recited as though it had become a reflex, saying her name was Lily, that she was a good girl, that she was not allowed to ask, that she was not allowed to remember, and not allowed to mention the dead. Nathan closed his eyes for a long moment, because each word spoken from the mouth of a 6-year-old sounded like an indictment against the woman who had shattered a fragile soul. He asked whether she ever saw anyone else or had anyone to play with, and Lily shook her head, saying that the woman said friends were a luxury, and that she had to learn to live alone, and if she did not learn, then she would become like her father, weak and easy to kill. The innocent words struck straight into Nathan's chest, because easy to kill was not a phrase a child could invent, but a cruel echo planted by an adult who had turned brutality into doctrine. Nathan bowed his head, powerless fury burning beneath his skin, and told her he knew she missed her father and that he was sorry for not being there when she needed him. Lily looked at him, her gaze softening, and gently asked whether her father had ever cried. Nathan remembered the last night James cried when he realized Emily had been forced to leave the city to escape the spiral of revenge. When he held his daughter and whispered a goodbye, she was too young to understand, and he answered that her father was brave, but also very loving, and that he loved her very much. Lily nodded as if she had already known that, then pulled from her pocket a small crumpled piece of paper with shaky colored pencil lines showing a house, 2 adults, a child, and a shadow standing outside the window, and said she had drawn it long ago but never dared to color it because she never knew who would stay and who would disappear. Nathan took the drawing and placed it on the table as though it were something sacred, and told her she no longer had to fear, that from now on no one would force her into silence, no one would lock her in the dark, and no one would ever say her father was weak. Lily pressed her lips together and nodded again, this time more firmly, as if the promise carried enough weight to support the stolen years of her childhood. Nathan said nothing more, but in his heart he drew a red line, and if Veronica ever thought she could use this child as a chess piece, she had misjudged the depth of the cruelty Nathan was willing to reach when anyone dared touch his family, because nothing stirred his hatred more than turning a child into an instrument of power, and this time he would repay everything twice over. Nathan remained seated beside Lily, his hands on his knees, his eyes fixed on the childish drawing on the wooden table, the fragile house, the faceless figures, the dark shadow outside the window, a reminder that none of them had ever truly been safe. The wind outside howled through the cracks like the whispers of old ghosts. Yet in this room, beneath the soft light falling over Lily's wounded face, Nathan knew that compassion alone was not enough, because the child did not need a hug or a whispered comfort or silent sorrow. She needed a real promise. He lowered his voice, firm and steady, cutting through the quiet, and told Lily to listen carefully to every word he was about to say. She looked up at him, her eyes still carrying the suspicion born of too many broken promises, yet also holding a fragile glimmer of hope like the last winter sunlight. He told her that no one would ever hurt her again, not anyone, whether family or enemy, whether the one who raised him or the one who shared his blood. Even Veronica and the name fell through the room like a wound. Lily did not blink, only tightened her grip on the pillow, as Nathan continued his words, carving into the cold stone of the past, saying he knew what she had endured and could not change what had already happened, but he could promise that, from now on, if anyone dared touch her or drag her back into the world she had fled, they would have to face him, and he would show mercy to no one. Lily remained silent, but her small shoulders began to relax as though the promise had pierced through the layers of vigilance built over years of captivity. And Nathan watched her for a long moment before reaching out to gently place his hand over hers. Her tiny hand was cold, yet it did not pull away, but slowly, timidly rested, fully in his palm like a sign, like an acceptance. Nathan softened his voice and told her she would sleep in his room tonight, that he would sit in the chair and go nowhere, and as long as she opened her eyes, he would still be there. Lily nodded once, and that single nod carried more weight than 1,000 words. He stood, led her to the bed with care, as though afraid to shatter something too fragile, covered her with the blanket up to her neck, then sat in the chair beside her. The night stretched on. The city beyond continued its restless motion, yet Nathan did not close his eyes, his gaze toward the window while his mind sank deep into calculation. Because Veronica had crossed a line, and this was no longer about power or tangled family history. She had turned a child into the victim of an adult game, and Nathan would not allow it to happen again. When Lily's breathing grew even, and she fell into a sleep unbroken by locked doors or threats, Nathan Rose took out his phone and sent a short message to Tony to activate the Dakshoa plan without delay and without mercy. When the sent notification appeared, he looked back at Lily one last time and turned away because the promise had been spoken, and a Callahan had never allowed a blood oath to become meaningless. Emily stood with her arms crossed against her chest, leaning against the glass door frame of the second-floor living room, her cold, sharp gaze following every movement of the men dressed in black circling the estate grounds below. She did not need to ask who they were, because she already knew they were Nathan's people. Shadows trained to do the work even the police hesitated to touch. Behind her, Nathan entered, carrying 2 cups of hot coffee, placing one on the table before sitting down in silence to wait. For several minutes, neither of them spoke, only the sound of the wall clock and the rain tapping softly outside filled the space. Finally, Emily broke the silence, saying she did not trust him. Nathan shrugged and replied that he did not ask for her trust. He only needed her not to stand in his way. She turned back toward him, tightening her folded arms, and said that she had just pulled Lily out of the hell that he and his mad family had created, and told him not to say she was in the way. Nathan lifted his eyes to her, the fatigue and resolve unmistakable, as he told her he was not calling her an enemy, but if she chose to go alone, she would not survive. Because Veronica did not merely play with the law, she commanded it, that she held judges and police in her palm, and that even within the organization he once led there were already traces of her influence. Emily fell silent, knowing what he said was true, because Veronica was a danger that smiled, a nightmare with a beautiful face. Yet the idea of working with Nathan after everything that had happened between them was something she had never imagined, because he had once abandoned James and allowed him to die without a final word, a truth she had never forgiven. But now Lily's life lay on the scale, and hatred no longer had the strength to hold her back. She took a small notebook from her coat and set it on the table, saying it was James's diary found beneath the attic boards, among their mother's old belongings. With certain parts encoded that she believed he could decipher, Nathan opened it, flipping through quickly, his eyes stopping on a passage. Written with the left hand, the script slanted and broken, just as James wrote when rushing, and he nodded, saying that it was a cipher James used when he still worked for an international organization before withdrawing, and that he could decode it but needed time. Emily sat opposite him, still wary, and asked how much time they had. Nathan looked out at the rain thickening beyond the glass and answered, at most 1 week after that. Veronica would move or erase every trace tied to Lily and to anyone who knew the truth. Emily nodded and said then they had no choice, she would stay, but that did not mean she forgave him. Nathan met her eyes steadily and said he did not seek forgiveness, only Lily's safety. And if that meant joining hands with the person who hated him most, he would do it. They looked at one another in silence. Between them lay a heavy past, wounds that never healed, and secrets yet unearthed. But at the center of all of it was a little girl with wide eyes, broken sleep, and a heart twisted by those who were supposed to love her. And if there was anything that could make 2 people once standing on opposite sides sit at the same table, it was love for the same child, temporary allies yet still allies. And sometimes that was all it took to begin a righteous war. Later, Nathan sat alone in the dark room, the pale yellow glow of a desk lamp falling across the open pages of James's old diary, while the rain outside seemed to listen as the past echoed back through the paper. Emily stood behind him, her arms crossed, her gaze tracking every movement, half guarded, half anxious, as he turned to page 13, where hurried, blurred ink and torn paper revealed something wrong beneath. Strange geometric symbols, triangles, locked within squares, diagonal slashes cutting through the day, number 31 and uneven curves. Nathan frowned, then suddenly stood, moving straight to the cabinet behind him, pulling out another notebook, old and dust-coated, placing it beside James's diary and opening to a red-marked page, his eyes tightening as he saw the match. He said this was the code system James used during covert operations in Europe, that each symbol represented a person, an action, or a specific event. Emily stepped closer, pointing to the triangle, asking who it stood for. Nathan studied it, then answered in a lowered voice that the triangle symbolized Veronica, and that whenever James referred to her, he used that sign which represented a three-layered betrayal of family organization and ideals. Emily clenched her hand and asked if James had known for a long time. Nathan nodded, saying James had known there was a traitor within their ranks and had gradually realized it was Veronica, though he never had full proof. But here he pointed to a repeated 5-character sequence, V3S91, and Emily tilted her head, recalling she had seen that code on the back of an old photo Lily carried as a child, now lost, likely taken by Veronica. Nathan quickly wrote it down and turned to the final page of the diary, where trembling left-handed writing revealed that if he had not returned to the old office that day, he would never have seen the copy of a stock transfer contract, bearing her name that she had arranged everything: the death of Victor, the father's accident, and even the explosion at the main staircase. That he had remained silent too long and now feared everything was beyond control. A chill ran down Emily's spine, as she understood that James's death was not an accident, but the result of a calculated chain of plans by the very woman he once called sister. Nathan closed the diary and looked at Emily without hesitation, telling her that Veronica had not only betrayed James but sold out the entire organization, killed to climb to power, and used Lily to bury the past. Emily nodded, her lips pressed tight, and said, "Then they had enough reason they would make her pay." Nathan stood his eyes, no longer the eyes of a man protecting a child, but of one who had lived in darkness, understood its machinery, and was now ready to drag the traitor into the light. He turned back to the table, took his phone, and dialed an internal line, ordering Tony to recheck every legal file tied to stock transfers from 20 years ago, and to find who held the original documents. Then, looking at Emily, said they must recover Lily's photo because the final key to exposing the truth was hidden there. Emily nodded, her gaze sharp as steel, because this time the doubts were no longer scattered. They now held the artery of the secret, and it led straight to Veronica Callahan. The call came at 3 a.m, and though the screen showed only a hidden number, Nathan already knew who it was. He left his office, quietly closed the door with care, so as not to wake Lily sleeping peacefully in the next room, and went down into the basement where no one could listen in. Veronica's voice flowed through the line the instant he answered, soft, smooth, like honey being poured. Yet every word carried the scent of poison as she called him brother and said how unfortunate it was that they always had to speak under circumstances like this. Nathan said nothing, only listened as her tone sharpened, shedding its false sweetness when she told him she knew he was keeping the little girl, and praised him for his bravery before warning that playing protector while standing on the edge of power was never a wise move. His voice dropped to a calm that felt like ice as he warned her not to touch Lily again, only for Veronica to cut him off with a light, steady laugh, like the ticking of a clock, asking what he would do: expose her, kill her, destroy her publicly, reminding him that she had built half this empire with him, and that if she fell, he would be left with nothing but a child and shattered memories. His hand tightened around the phone as he demanded that she speak her terms, and the laughter vanished as her voice hissed through clenched teeth, demanding all shares and full control of the organization, everything, including the Miami network, the Western port, cargo, and the complete internal records. In exchange for Lily's life, a normal life with school friends and her sister, and if he refused, the child would vanish forever. Nathan gave a quiet, humorless laugh, asking if she truly believed he would trust her promise, to which she replied that trust was irrelevant, and that this time she held the knife and that the blade was pressed against the child's throat, giving him 48 hours before she sent the time and place, and warned that if he was late he would never find even the body. The call ended, and Nathan stood motionless for several seconds, his breathing slow and heavy like a storm compressed within his chest. 48 hours, a choice without escape, surrender everything he had built with blood and shadow to save one small life, or keep his power and lose what remained of his soul. He went back upstairs to find Emily already waiting, her face tight with tension and without words. She understood as he nodded that Veronica wanted everything in exchange for Lily, and when Emily asked if he would give in, he met her eyes and said that he would do whatever it took for the child to live, but he would not let Veronica win, that he would let her believe she had won, and when she lowered the knife he would drive in the final blade. And so the blood pact was formed, not in signatures, but in the hearts of a man and a woman who knew that to reclaim justice for a child one sometimes had to pass through darkness using the enemy's own steel. Immediately after the call, Nathan sealed the basement, climbed to his study and opened the concealed safe behind an antique portrait where there was no money or files. Only an old phone without a SIM used to call a single number he had not used in 4 years, and after 3 rings, a curt male voice answered, saying he thought Nathan was dead. To which Nathan replied that he needed an entry into the FBI as fast as possible. And when the voice warned that one wrong step could destroy an entire network, Nathan glanced toward the window, where Lily was being coaxed to eat breakfast, and answered that he had never been more certain. The contact told him of an agent named Keller investigating interstate laundering, who had once been pushed out of Veronica's reach, and arranged a meeting. Nathan then summoned Tony, ordered him to analyze every route of Veronica's cargo operations, especially the southern ports, to find a weakness the FBI could strike, while Emily quietly contacted an old lawyer friend to trace anonymous investments linked to Veronica's black funds, and the following days passed in absolute silence, like a lake hiding a storm beneath its surface, until Nathan met Keller at an abandoned warehouse without cameras or signal, and offered him clear transactions, visual proof, and internal witnesses in exchange for temporary protection for a child named Lily Carter. Keller agreed with a warning, and Nathan countered with his own. And back at the estate, a shadow server was installed beneath the library, encrypting months of collected evidence against Veronica, while Tony rebuilt the security perimeter in 3 layers, isolating any trace of her influence, and Emily prepared the financial dossier to collapse the shell companies. By nightfall, the mansion was unnaturally quiet. No raised voices, no laughter. Every breath held waiting. As Nathan sat alone at the dining table, before the countdown he had set on his phone, 48 hours each second, now measured in blood, sweat, and the life of an innocent child, and yet this time, Nathan was not preparing to surrender, he was preparing to end it all completely without mercy. Emily vanished the following afternoon, when there were less than 20 hours left until the exchange. She said she was stopping by the law office to retrieve additional financial documents, and then disappeared without a trace. Her car was later found abandoned, near an underground parking area with the doors unlocked. Her wallet and phone still inside, yet no security camera captured her. Leaving the vehicle, Nathan received the news while sitting with Lily in the library. His eyes darkened, his jaw clenched, and he rose without a word, immediately ordering the entire perimeter around the estate, sealed, contacting Agent Keller with urgency, and dispatching men to trace every movement Emily had made since leaving the house. Yet deep inside, Nathan knew this was no coincidence. This was Veronica's counterstrike, and as always, she never struck head-on but aimed for the weakest point. That night, an envelope appeared in the mailbox by the main gate. No one saw who delivered it, but the camera caught the image of a black, cloaked figure gliding past like a ghost. Inside was a color photograph, grainy but unmistakable, showing Emily bound, gagged, seated in a windowless concrete room, and on the wall behind her, scrawled in glaring red paint, were the words, "The Second Sacrifice." Attached was a small note written in that familiar, elegant, slanted hand, stating that he would hand over the empire, and she would return lives, and if not, the next would not be the sister but the child. Nathan collapsed into a chair as the shock surged from the pit of his heart in that moment. Every plan, every layer of protection he had painstakingly built seemed absurdly fragile. He believed he had controlled the board, but Veronica, as always, was one step ahead. That same night, Lily quietly came down the staircase while the house was in chaos, sweeping security. She heard the word kidnapping. She heard Emily's name repeated with urgency and fear, and a young guard she trusted approached, whispering that Uncle Nathan wanted her in the safe house through the back exit. Trusting him, she followed, but when the guard opened the rear gate, he didn't lead her to safety, but pushed her toward a woman dressed in black who was already waiting. Veronica bent down and smiled, a sweet, chilling smile, calling the child, "Good girl, at last you came out." Lily stepped back, but a man seized her from behind, covering her mouth and lifting her struggling body into the air, as Veronica maintained her calm smile and leaned in to whisper that she only needed to speak with her briefly and that he would see her sister again if Uncle Nathan behaved. They vanished as swiftly as they had appeared, leaving behind only a deep shoe print and the traitorous guard lying unconscious by the gate, silenced. After serving his purpose, along with a small pink plastic bracelet dropped near the steps. When Tony found the bracelet, the entire estate plunged into real chaos. Nathan slammed his fist into the wall, blood seeping from his knuckles as Tony shouted into the radio, ordering the city sealed, but Nathan knew it was already too late. This time it was no longer a threat. Veronica now held both a child and a woman, a symbol of old guilt and a symbol of the future, and to save either he would have to place everything he had left on the board with no time for calculation, no retreat as the final confrontation approached, with the most ruthless player being his own blood and Veronica no longer playing by rules because she was the rule and Emily now nothing more than the second sacrifice. The air inside the vehicle was suffocatingly tight as Nathan sat in the back seat, his gaze fixed on the satellite map displayed on the laptop between the front seats. Agent Keller sat beside him, wearing a headset, receiving continuous updates from surveillance teams encircling the abandoned industrial complex on the southern edge of the city. Beneath the dim, distant headlights, it looked like a dead zone, but Nathan knew Emily was inside, and possibly Lily as well. The plan was finalized in under 10 minutes, with no time for traps and no room for error. Veronica believed she held the rules, but Nathan had bent the game the moment she issued her ultimatum. The raid began at 4:17 in the morning. The agents advanced in absolute silence, using dense fog as cover. Nathan did not stay behind. He led the front line with Keller, his gun at his waist, eyes unblinking, heart pounding like footsteps echoing through rusted steel corridors. They breached the basement with a small explosive, the thunderous blast triggering screams inside. But Nathan did not slow. He surged forward like a shadow, searching room after room, until he heard a faint groan from the last door on the right. He kicked it open and found Emily inside, pale, bound with plastic ties, her eyes wide with terror yet still conscious. Nathan rushed to her, cut the bindings and held her without a word, only turning away once he was sure she breathed evenly. He faced Keller with glacial eyes and demanded where Lily was. Keller nodded to another agent who activated a signal device, then drew Nathan aside and played a recording of Veronica's voice, cold, layered with wind and distant train horns, mocking him, saying he was not smarter than her, that she knew he would come, that he would find Emily, but that she was not foolish enough to keep both in one place, and that Lily was no longer in Chicago, though still alive for now, and that if he wanted certainty, he must come alone to the northern inspection station at 8 in the morning, or never see the child again. Nathan clenched his fist and turned to Keller, accusing her of playing him, but Keller shook his head and said quietly she was desperate, and they knew it, as he revealed an aerial photograph taken 2 days earlier of a truck parked at the inspection station with a soundproof compartment inside, containing Lily. Nathan froze, his heart hammering, as he demanded how long they had known, and Keller replied that they had never lost the child, only the identity of the handler, and that acting too soon would have forced Veronica to move her, but now having used Emily as her final card, she no longer had the strength to relocate. Nathan looked at Keller, his eyes blazing with rage and fragile hope, accusing him of manipulation, and Keller answered evenly that he was protecting the child, and that the only way to keep Veronica unaware was to let Nathan suffer as if it price were real, and now he had his chance to end everything. Emily, under medical care, never took her eyes off Nathan as he clasped her hand, whispering an apology, and she returned his grip, urging him not to leave Lily there another minute. Nathan rose and turned to Keller, ordering a vehicle prepared, stating he would go alone, and this time he would not follow Veronica's rules. He would make new ones, and this time there would be no move left for the traitor. The car moved silently through the fog-drenched roads leading to the northern inspection station where Veronica had set the meeting. Nathan drove alone, his eyes fixed on the handheld navigation screen, while his mind unraveled tangled memories, stitching them together like the final pieces of a picture hidden for far too long. Veronica believed she controlled every piece, that with a single call, a single line of text, or a single look, she could force Nathan to kneel in a game where she alone was queen. But she did not know that from the moment she reappeared after years of absence, Nathan was no longer the naive younger brother who once worshipped her like an idol. He had changed, and this time he turned every one of her lies into a marker to draw the net tight. 3 years earlier, when the first shadow transactions appeared under organizations linked to Veronica, Nathan had secretly hired an independent illegal cybersecurity team unknown to anyone in the network. They planted code into every device she ever touched, from her personal computer to her backup phone. Every encrypted call, every command sent through internal lines, was silently copied to an isolated server hidden inside an abandoned church on the west side of the city, where no one would ever suspect. Even when Veronica believed she was erasing data or cleaning traces, those very actions became the clearest proof that she knew exactly what she needed to hide. The chess pieces she so proudly moved across the underworld board had in truth been marked from the beginning, and every move was recorded by Nathan himself. Even her meetings with Southern Port crime lords, her handshakes with weapons groups in New Mexico, and the recording of her threatening to kill Lily if Nathan did not surrender the organization, were all captured through a listening device. Hidden inside the necklace, she always wore the one Nathan gifted her during their first reunion as a symbol of family. She never removed it, and it became the final link that allowed the FBI to trace her money laundering and trafficking empire to its roots. Keller was not merely a shadow ally. He was the bridge connecting Nathan to a large-scale surveillance operation. Nathan had quietly activated for nearly 2 years, waiting only for the moment she revealed her true face. And now, with Emily rescued and Lily about to be brought home, the final curtain was ready to fall. Nathan stopped the car nearly 200 meters from the station, stepped out, left all weapons behind as demanded, and carried only an old photograph of James Carter and Veronica as children. The last reminder that they had once been family, but for him, family never meant betrayal. She stood there still, arrogant lips, crimson eyes, cold as steel. Yet this time Nathan no longer trembled as he approached her and said in a low voice, like the toll of an ending bell, that in chess the queen is powerful but no piece is stronger than the player who knows when to sacrifice the queen to end the game. Veronica froze, her lips twitching, and a second later sirens erupted from every direction as Keller and the task force stormed in, surrounding her like a violent tide. She turned her head, her eyes burning into Nathan, and accused him of betrayal. Nathan answered with a faint, cold smile that she had stepped into the net herself, and he had only helped her see it sooner. When the handcuffs snapped around her wrists, she did not scream or struggle. She only stared at Nathan for a long moment, and then laughed a distorted, echoing laugh, as if she still held one unturned card. But to Nathan it no longer mattered. The game was over, and the one who believed herself the final player was in truth only a pawn fitted with a recorder from the very first move, a double-faced piece, a spy who never knew she was being watched. Veronica was escorted into the tactical vehicle beneath, flashing red lights cutting through the dense morning fog, her hands cuffed behind her head, slightly lowered, like a defeated figure, yet her lips still curved in that eerie smile that sent chills through all who saw it. Nathan stood several meters away, his gaze never leaving her for even a second. Keller stepped beside him, giving a firm nod as if to signal that at last everything was finished, but Nathan knew that with Veronica nothing was ever truly finished. When the vehicle door closed, she lifted her head and looked back at him through the bulletproof glass. That same self-satisfied gaze she had worn as a child whenever she won a game. Knowing Nathan could never catch up, Keller sensed the hesitation in Nathan's eyes, placed a hand on his shoulder and told him not to let her deceive him, that they would ensure nothing slipped away. But Nathan shook his head quietly, saying Keller did not understand her because Veronica never smiled when she lost, and if she laughed it meant she still held a card. He turned away, pulled out his phone, and opened the anonymous email, received only minutes before the raid, with the chillingly simple subject line behind the mirror. It was a video feed from a hidden camera inside Veronica's private room, known only to the installer. In the recording, she sat on the bed staring directly into the lens, as if she knew she was being watched, and said that if Nathan was seeing this, then congratulations. She assumed he had won, that he always wanted to be the good man, the savior, the protector of the child she once sought to discard, but that he also knew it was all illusion because she did not need to survive to win. She only needed to plant enough seeds for his world to collapse on its own. She reminded him of the list of buyers through her system, politicians, police, judges, and even those he had trusted as allies, and declared she had arranged for it to be released, not by her but by a neutral party, and that when the list surfaced, when the entire system was exposed, he would see how alone he truly was. She said she was the loser but never the weak one, and the video ended with a small, steady laugh that lingered like a dull blade scraping flesh. Nathan shut off the phone, his fist clenched, fury and helplessness flooding his chest as he met Keller's eyes and nodded, saying they had to move before the list was released. Keller frowned, unsure, and Nathan gave no answer because he knew Veronica well enough to understand that when she said something existed, it was already set in motion, and if they were one step late, everything would collapse. Inside the vehicle, Veronica sat quietly still, smiling, her head resting back, eyes closed without fear or regret, because for her victory was not survival or escape, but knowing her enemy would live in the terror that her shadow still existed, that at any moment everything could fall with a single blink. And if that stole Nathan's sleep night after night, then for Veronica that was enough. However, she did not know that at that very moment, Tony sent a simple message to Nathan's phone. The neutral party has been secured, and the server is wiped clean. Veronica's final card had been burned before she even played it. Autumn arrived quietly on the small streets of the western suburbs of Chicago, where yellow leaves blanketed the yards and the wind carried the scent of damp earth after rain. Nathan's house was no longer a fortress of power and shadow, but was slowly becoming a true home, as the laughter of a child began to echo through hallways that once seemed condemned to silence. Emily and Lily moved in with him just weeks after everything with Veronica ended. There was no formal decision, no solemn conversation, no invitation or proposal. One morning, Lily simply came to sit beside Nathan for breakfast. Emily brewed coffee in the kitchen, as if she had always belonged there, and one day no one spoke of leaving again. Emily was no longer the woman shaped by suspicion and resentment, but someone learning to heal not only for her sister but for her own long-wounded heart. She enrolled in trauma therapy training, joined community support groups, and spent evenings reading Lily to sleep on the sofa in the living room where Nathan often worked nearby. Lily changed so quickly it sometimes left Nathan breathless. She laughed more, no longer startled at sudden noises, and slowly relearned how to trust adults, especially the man once named on a trembling scrap of paper as the one who would protect her. Every Saturday morning, the three of them walked together to the nearby park. Lily always ran ahead with her arms open to the wind as if she were flying. Emily followed more slowly, watching her with gentle eyes, while Nathan walked last, silent yet vigilant, as if the world now consisted only of the two people he chose to protect. Some evenings after Lily had fallen asleep, Emily and Nathan sat on the second-floor balcony with hot tea, speaking of nothing in particular. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they were simply quiet, yet no words were needed to understand each other, and in those moments the ghosts of the past retreated, giving way to something fragile yet stronger than any pact ever sealed in the underworld. One late afternoon, as Nathan repaired the wooden fence in the backyard, Lily ran to him holding a clumsily colored drawing, showing three simple figures: a tall, dark-haired man, a long-haired woman, and a little girl in a pink dress between them with hesitant, careful letters above that read "Our home." Nathan stared at the paper for a long time, then gathered the child into his arms, unable to speak, and in that moment he knew that no matter how much blood and betrayal the past contained, no matter how many seeds of doubt Veronica had planted this present, this love was real and strong enough to withstand it all, because sometimes family is not where one is born, but where one chooses to live, to love, and to belong. Dawn rose slowly over dew-covered rooftops as sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting soft bands of light across the polished wooden floors of the small suburban house. In the kitchen, the kettle whispered while Lily giggled, trying to tie a blue ribbon into her hair, her shining eyes mirroring the morning light like a promise of a peaceful day. Emily entered, carrying 2 glasses of smoothies, one for herself and one for Nathan, who stood at the end of the hallway, pulling on his coat, ready to leave. She handed him the glass with a silent look, filled with quiet partnership. Nathan knelt to tie Lily's shoelaces, then brushed her hair and whispered something that made her burst into laughter and throw her arms around him. She boarded the school bus at 7:30, waving through the window until it disappeared at the end of the street. Emily took the subway at 8 to her classes at the City Counseling Center, where she trained in child psychology, listening each day to stories hidden behind the eyes of children like Lily once had been, learning how to help them redraw their worlds with brighter colors and also learning how to forgive herself. Nathan drove to the old district that once housed the underground organization, now transformed into a center for abused children that he had quietly built over months. He no longer ruled it with power or fear, but worked as an ordinary man, making coffee for staff, cleaning counseling rooms, organizing parent support meetings. Those who had known him in the old world would never recognize this man anymore. No longer Nathan Callahan, the cold-blooded kingpin, but Nathan the guardian, the protector, the man who once held hundreds of lives in his hands, now using those same hands to soothe the wounds of small, fragile lives. At midday, he video called Emily and Lily. Lily proudly shared that she had earned a good score in her spelling test, and Emily smiled softly, speaking of her first practical session with autistic children. Brief, simple conversations, yet they anchored the three of them through the rush of daily life. In the afternoon, Nathan met with lawyers and therapists about a new scholarship fund for children who had survived domestic abuse. He spoke little but listened intently, as if each chart and figure carried the story of a single child's future. In the evening, the small house glowed again as Emily cooked while Nathan and Lily built a new set of blocks she had brought home from school. The three of them ate together, sharing stories of the day, laughing beneath the warm light. After dinner, Lily read aloud to them, her young voice uneven yet filled with joy. When she fell asleep, Nathan stood in the doorway watching Emily tuck her in, and together they quietly left the room, leaving the nightlight glowing like a small autumn moon. Out in the backyard, Nathan and Emily sat side by side, their hands close without touching, yet feeling each other's warmth enough to know they were no longer alone. A day passed ordinary and quiet, and for them that ordinariness was the greatest miracle of all. Dinner unfolded beneath the soft golden light as three people once dragged through violence and shadow now sat around a simple wooden table, where there was no longer distance, no longer suspicion, and no longer pain. Lily spoke animatedly between bites about her day at school. Emily smiled as she listened, and Nathan sat quietly, sometimes nodding, sometimes watching the child with a contemplative gaze. And in one fleeting moment when Lily looked up and reached for his hand, Nathan was carried back to that long-ago image of a fragile little girl stepping into a room filled with menace, lifting her trembling hand with a small piece of paper, bearing the words that would never fade from his memory, that she had said he would protect her. And he had done so, not perfectly and not easily, but he had kept that promise, protecting not only Lily but also the very last part of his own humanity. For family is not the place where you are born, but the place you choose to love and to belong. This story is not merely a battle between good and evil, but a journey of people learning to forgive, to heal, and to rebuild the trust that was once shattered. And if you have remained with us to this final moment, we thank you sincerely for walking with us through this emotional path. How did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone in your own life? Have you ever experienced a moment when you realized that sometimes family is not blood, but those who stay when the world turns its back? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, because we truly wish to hear the voice of your heart. And if you loved this journey, do not forget to subscribe to our channel, press like and share this video so these deeply emotional stories may reach even more people. We will return each day with new stories, meaningful life lessons, and quiet moments that help you find connection between emotion and reality. Goodbye, and we hope to see you again in the next video. And we wish all of you watching good health, a peaceful and meaningful life, and days filled with love and warmth. Farewell, and until we meet again.